At 11, I led Girl Scouts on a trail ride, spotted smoke, and rushed everyone back. The pastor's wife scammed $105K, so I got revenge. Hello, everyone. My nieces and nephews have decided that, as the cool aunt, I must become proficient at this platform, known as Reddit, by sharing tales from my past. I trust that you will enjoy reading these stories just as much as they have enjoyed hearing them over the years. To initiate this narrative, I must provide some context regarding the location where these events unfolded. My grandfather owned a campground spanning over 150 acres, featuring more than a dozen various buildings. These structures included communal areas, a ceremony hall, a barn, 18 distinct cabins, and a few additional facilities typically found in a picturesque campground. The site was utilized for a multitude of functions, including corporate retreats, weddings, camps, and getaways. Whenever a camp involving horses was organized, my grandfather recruited the grandchildren to assist him. By the time I arrived on the scene, he had already become accustomed to dealing with the chaos of shouting children and excited adults who believed they were knowledgeable about horses. One particular incident occurred when I was around 11 years old. I was assisting with a guided tour for the Girl Scouts during one of the trail rides when I sensed something was amiss in the air. I instructed everyone to turn back, while the den mother tried to complain about my decision to cut their ride short. I fabricated a story, claiming that one of the horses had a severe limp and that we needed to return immediately. The girls were concerned about the horse in question, and one of the riders volunteered to walk alongside her horse all the way back. I reassured him that she would be fine, but insisted we must turn back right now. Once we navigated our way out of the dense forest trail, where the trees were no longer enclosing us, we discovered the source of my unease: smoke. Thick plumes of smoke were rising from the mountain, and I knew that the worst place for a fire was directly beneath you when on a mountainside. I was well acquainted with the property, having grown up riding and exploring it. I commanded everyone to allow their horses to race back to the barn. The barn included a spacious arena consisting solely of dirt, which would suffice until we could transport them to the fire station. I watched as the girls rode past me, and I worried that someone might fall off as they struggled to maintain control. Fortunately, we returned to the arena without major incidents, though many of the girls were in tears. One of my older brothers assured us that everything was fine and informed the girls that they would be earning a few additional badges that day. They would sign off on them, which greatly lifted the girls' spirits. Fortunately, the fire had not yet spread far onto my grandfather's land. I was aware of the large water tanks, having participated in cleaning them in the past, but I had never fully comprehended their importance. That day, I witnessed my grandfather's water storage almost extinguish an entire forest fire. The 5 small tanks, 30,000 gallons each, were accessible at critical points by the fire department. The 3 medium tanks, 65,000 gallons each, were connected to a sprinkler system that drenched everything on the property, transforming it into thick mud. Even the gravel and concrete paths were coated in mud. However, the 2 large tanks, 120,000 gallons each, were utilized by the firefighting helicopters. To a child, it felt like being in the midst of a war zone. I was frightened as I attempted to keep the Girl Scouts and the horses calm when the helicopters flew overhead to refill at the main large tank. By the end of it, the fire was extinguished. The Girl Scouts earned 5 badges ranging from fire safety to leadership, and everyone was safe. The cleanup from the fire lasted 2 weeks, involving extensive pressure washing and a considerable amount of backbreaking labor. Now, let's turn to the primary reason for my presence here to recount a story of petty revenge. On my grandfather's property, there were stunning trails, a magnificent vista with minimal light pollution, and ample opportunities for hiking, exploration, and booking events. My grandfather was very protective of these special spots, as he knew that if he allowed people to wander freely, they would not pay for their use. Consequently, he took great care to mark the area as private property and would chase down anyone who trespassed. One individual in town persistently pressured my grandfather for free access to the property, citing that my grandmother attended the church. She demanded that he allow them complimentary use of the property for every book study and event. However, she intended to charge an admission fee that would benefit the church of which her husband was one of the pastors. To say that my grandfather had no fondness for this money-hungry woman would be an understatement. Although he wasn't a churchgoer, he sought to keep the peace with his wife's congregation by hosting free events once a year for the church's youth. These events allowed children to come, receive meals for a 3-day weekend, engage with the horses, take trail rides, and fish in the river or the large pond on the property. Depending on their ages, he would host 3 such events each year for children in the area, often enlisting his children and grandchildren to help run the events to minimize costs. After 5 years of this arrangement, I discovered that this woman had been charging families nearly $300 to attend her church events. I had gone to the church with my oldest brother, who they mistakenly assumed was my father, as they attempted to sell him on the event. His face turned red as he sought further clarification regarding the dates and details of the event. He agreed to consider it while she shifted her attention to another family. She had been promoting sponsorships that provided discounts for children to attend. It was clear that she was extracting every possible dollar from her fellow church members. My brother and I were at the church to speak with the head pastor, not the woman's husband, about visiting our grandmother, who was bedridden due to her advanced age. However, during the sermon, my brother rose after whispering to another woman to inquire whether the speaker was the husband of that woman. Upon receiving confirmation, my brother stood up. This was not our church, and no one recognized us. My brother had a voice that could project across the room, so when I suddenly heard him speak after standing, I was taken aback myself. You can only imagine the expressions on the faces of the over 200 attendees as a stranger interrupted a sermon. Brother, I'm astonished that you can stand up there and speak of honesty to these people. You and your wife are con artists and thieves. You have been defrauding them for who knows how long, and I'm intrigued to discover just how deep your corruption goes. Pastor, excuse me, sir. What are you talking about? Brother, my grandfather manages the horse camp that all the children are attending this upcoming weekend. He has never charged a single cent to any of those kids or their families. He understands the financial strain of sending kids to fancy camps because he had to pay for all of his children. He despised having to find so much money all the time. He provides free events for the kids, and his grandchildren assist him. Trust me, I serve as the stable master during those events. You could have heard a pin drop. The pastor's face turned several shades of red, and then a woman stood up a few rows back from us. Woman, what do you mean? He doesn't charge. This woman appeared ready to unleash her fury, and I noticed she had 5 children with her. She seemed prepared to incite a riot as my brother nodded. Brother, my grandfather understands firsthand how difficult it is to come up with funds, and how attending different events affected his children and aided their growth. He covers their meals, allows them to ride the horses, involves his family in teaching them about horses, and, hey Daniel, do you remember me? One of the older children had been staring at my brother as the boy confirmed that my brother worked at the event. At that moment, chaos erupted. It took hours to resolve the uproar. The pastor's wife had mysteriously vanished amid all the commotion. It became clear that the pastor believed his wife, who was responsible for the organization, would allocate all the funds to my grandfather. All along, she had kept the money for herself. Things escalated as it became apparent that her absence was linked to the deceit she had perpetrated. Each of these events accommodated around 20 to 25 children. People had donated funds to help send kids from less fortunate families there, so we could only guess how much illicit money had been exchanged for that purpose. We do have an estimate for how much she had embezzled, approximately $105,000, before she vanished into the night. I found it utterly bewildering. I simply wanted to return home and look after the horses. My oldest brother's anger paled in comparison to my grandfather's outrage. He was furious about everything that had transpired and allowed only the head pastor to visit his wife. No one else was permitted. Though he held a grudge, at his wife's request, he refrained from letting bitterness affect the children. We proceeded with the planned events, but my grandfather's resentment grew. Participation skyrocketed from a maximum of 25 to nearly 50 per session. Every bed in the campground was filled, every bunk occupied, and our spirits felt utterly depleted. As a child, I felt cheated, but I resolved to keep that hidden while trying to follow my grandfather's example. I am certain I failed miserably at times, but I genuinely tried. Now, we arrive at the revenge aspect of the tale. All of the aforementioned events transpired during the delightful period when the internet was a new thing. My grandfather had his venue listed in the yellow pages, if that helps to date things. I had turned 20, and my grandmother's health, which had steadily declined over the past few years, had taken a sudden downturn. Her life was drawing to a close. My grandfather asked for my assistance with her care and overseeing the events because he was in no mental or emotional state to interact with anyone. I managed to balance taking care of their needs while running the venue amidst the scheduled events. On the website, I removed all the details and posted a message that stated, "Due to current circumstances, only previously scheduled events will take place. Thank you. We will resume regular operations after these events conclude." It was the most polite way I could express, "My grandparents cannot handle visitors at this time, so please leave us alone." After about 5 months of managing things, my truck broke down while I was with the pastor in town. Unfortunately for me, the auto shop required a part from another city, which would take several days to arrive. I requested a family member to tow my truck to the shop, and he kindly offered to have his wife drop off their car for me to continue managing things with my grandmother while he took care of my vehicle. I respectfully declined, as I desperately needed a break. Even a ride to a nearby town 30 minutes away would provide some relief from the overwhelming atmosphere I was experiencing. They agreed to drive me over to the shop so my truck could be repaired. The owner estimated it would take about 3 hours, allowing me to explore the town in the meantime. I assured my family member that I would be fine on my own and to go ahead. He gave me a hug and informed the auto shop that he would cover the repair costs. I was grateful for that, as our family motto is to support one another. Thus, I wandered around a town I hadn't previously explored, in search of a decent place for lunch. Upon arriving at a restaurant, I noticed a beautifully crafted flyer displayed in the window. It announced an upcoming meteor shower and how breathtaking it would be. It warned that light pollution from the next town would overshadow the splendor of this spectacular event. It also detailed an event to be held on the mountain, claiming that parking would be $20 for a remarkable view of the sky, weather permitting. I smiled while reading the flyer, then did a double take. The flyer featured a specific vista that was solely accessible on my grandfather's property. I eagerly noted down all the information from the flyer and promised myself I would call them as soon as possible. I went inside to order food while contemplating whether I had accidentally overlooked an event or not. Upon returning home and cross-referencing the schedules, I confirmed that I had not forgotten anything. We had room for about 40 cars at best, so I was curious about where they planned to park. I decided to call using an out-of-state cell phone, courtesy of an uncle and aunt who were visiting my grandmother when I returned with my truck. "Host, hi, how can I assist you?" "Me, hello, I found your flyer. Oh my goodness, it sounds like it will be so much fun. I mean, the stars in our town are like 1,000% less impressive than what you get in my area. Are they truly as stunning up on the mountain?" "Host, absolutely. It's one of the prime spots for stargazing in our region. The view will be spectacular. Me, but I'm concerned about the number of attendees." Regarding parking, I hope my car won't, I don't know, get dirty or something." "Host, oh, no worries. We offer premium parking for $40, but the regular $20 just allows parking in a pasture. Me, the entrance fee is per vehicle, correct?" "Will there be another fee for attendees?" "Host, yes, a fee of $5 per person will also be required. Don't forget to bring cash for parking and entry fees. We'll have food trucks on site as well." I was trembling with rage at this point. I had already checked the schedule. No events were planned. The campground had become somewhat abandoned, with all the horses moved to my cousin's property at the base of the mountain, and I was taking care of my grandmother and grandfather at their cabin on another property closer to the hospital. "Me, okay, I'll be attending. Thank you so much." After bidding farewell, I hung up and seethed with anger. I was fully aware that the area was shut down, and we had been dealing with issues related to trespassers. I had been doing my utmost to manage events, the venue, and care for my grandparents. She had mentioned that there would be parking in a pasture, and I couldn't help but wonder which one she meant. I then realized it was time to prepare the soil for tilling and smoothing for the horses. I conceived a wonderfully devious plan. I approached my visiting family to check if they could keep an eye on my grandparents, then sped off to consult a relative whose wife was closely related to my grandparents. This man worked as a firefighter in our area. I entered with all the details I had and explained my scheme. After signing some documents, he tucked the information away in a drawer and gave me the green light to go ahead with my plan. I cultivated the pastures, every single one. I turned the soil over and smoothed it out, creating an enticing piece of land for parking. I then left all the gates wide open. I didn't want anyone breaking locks, and I knew this would happen whether I approved or not. If you've ever tilled soil, you know it becomes soft. This is essential for plant growth. Hard ground can be detrimental to plants just as quickly as overwatering or birds. The day before the event, while I was in the main lobby fetching water, I noticed a vehicle approaching. It sped up the drive, and who stepped out but the pastor's wife I'd encountered all those years ago, along with another woman from the church. It hit me then that they were running a con, and I wondered how many times they had exploited the campground in the past. I was filled with fury. I concealed myself and observed as they knocked on doors, searched for signs of life, and began conversing excitedly before darting away. They returned the next day, the day of the event, bringing a line of portable restrooms, a hand-washing station, and a few food vendors who were set up. They activated the lighting for the wedding vista, and I felt my blood pressure rise. At that point, I could have called law enforcement on them for trespassing, but I devised a plan more fitting for their malicious actions. I waited patiently until I noticed cars filling the pastures. 3 pastures were jam-packed with vehicles, and the driveway was so tightly packed that I was astonished at how many cars fit there. Gravel driveways and the concrete area by the barn were being utilized as well. I hadn't anticipated how extensive this event would truly be and began to fret about my plan. There were so many people, yet I had adhered to the law with assistance from family. I had posted private property and closed for maintenance signs throughout the campground, feeling increasingly nervous as I saw droves of people making their way up the path. However, I reminded myself that my plan was foolproof. When the food vendors turned off their lights, I recognized it was time. Everyone was now unable to leave, trapped at the vista. I initiated the chaos in the pastures first. That lovely tilled soil, combined with the sprinkler system, swiftly transformed into muddy quicksand, ensnaring vehicles deep into the muck. I went all in. I activated every fire sprinkler on the property. I remembered how I had enjoyed the view as a child, and everything was soaked. I started in the pastures, with the sprinklers designed for fire control. The result was everything I remembered. The pastures were inundated, the driveways were rendered impassable, and portions of the road were washed out, leaving only off-road vehicles capable of traversing it. With over 100 cars trapped in the pastures, I took great pleasure in hearing the commotion as people trekked down the path. After 10 minutes of operation, I turned off the sprinklers while everyone attempted to comprehend the unfolding situation. People began calling the police, emergency services, screaming all over, and confusion reigned. I had taken great delight in deflating the tires of the 2 women's cars and saturating them with extra water underneath. Their vehicle was quite literally stuck. Well, my revenge had been successfully executed. I trekked down the hill and left for town. By the time police arrived, I had already returned to my grandparents' home. They found me there, and family members could attest that I had stayed there the entire night when the police arrived. I explained that I had no plans to visit the campground that night, particularly with a fire safety test underway. We needed to test the water tank pressure by running them on an automatic timer for 10 minutes, and then we would measure the decreased water levels in the tanks over a few days once conditions improved. They inquired about the event, and we informed them that no events were scheduled, as we had advised the police department nearly a month earlier that the campground was closed until further notice. The 2 women behind the event were apprehended and charged with trespassing and a host of other offenses, including reckless endangerment. The firefighter produced the permit for testing the fire tanks after all. They were crucial for the operation of the fire department. Their 2 helicopters depended on those stations for filling up, and it was essential to confirm that each pump could deliver 100 gallons per minute. The women were responsible for the towing costs, damages caused while towing, accommodations for those stranded, and an array of legal fees. The woman from the church was already wanted due to her prior offenses and had been living with the other woman. assisting her in executing similar scams across the country by exploiting seasonally abandoned properties as their sources of deceitful income. I don't possess much information regarding the final resolution of everything, as my grandmother unfortunately passed away around that time. I do know that all profits garnered from their schemes were rerouted toward paying for damages and legal infractions. The costs to excavate the cars trapped in the mud were substantial. I hope you all found my account of revenge entertaining. I didn't anticipate it would take such a long time to recount, but when I share the story with family and friends, they are already familiar with the campgrounds, so I often skip some details. Summary women attempt to exploit seasonal campground closures. They end up facing consequences, with all their ill-gotten gains swallowed by the mud.